Hello, my dear students. Hope you all are doing good. Well, today we are going to learn plsql cursors, an object of plsql of dbms in Unit 5. This comes under Unit 5. So then let's start it. Now, what are the learning objectives of this lesson? You're going to learn what is a cursor, the need for a cursor, what are the different types of cursors. You have different types of cursors. You're going to see them. What are the different attributes that are associated with cursors? What are the steps involved in creating a cursor? And finally, some examples of cursors. Let's get straight away into the definition of the cursors. A cursor is a pointer that points to a result of a query. So you can understand, whenever you run a query, you get a result. This result, whatever you get, has to be stored in some temporary work area, and this work area is known as a cursor. It's as simple as that. Whenever you run a query, you get some result. That particular result is known as an active set, which is stored in one particular area of the memory, which is temporary in nature, and we call the work area as a cursor. plsql has two types of cursors, implicit cursor and explicit cursor. Implicit cursor, if the Oracle engine opens a cursor for the internal processing, then it's known as implicit cursor. As the name suggests, implicit means within. If the Oracle engine automatically creates and opens a cursor, it is known as implicit cursor. Whereas if the user defines a cursor, if a user defines a cursor, then it is known as an explicit cursor. Alright. So implicit cursors, what is it? Whenever Oracle executes an SQL statement such as select into, insert, update and delete, it automatically creates an implicit cursor. So whatever the SQL statements is or any kind of DML operations performed, automatically Oracle creates a cursor. Oracle internally manages the whole execution cycle of implicit cursors and reveals only the cursor's information. So after the query gets executed, the result of that query is stored in somewhere, is stored in a work area, and we call it a cursor. That we have already discussed. Now if you want to know some kind of information about that particular data set that you have retrieved, then there are certain attributes that are associated with cursors which actually help you to do that. So these are the four different attributes that are associated with cursors. Row count, is open, found and not found. So these are the four attributes that are associated with the cursors. Whenever you want to know any kind of information, we'll be using these four attributes. The implicit cursor is not elegant when the query returns 0 or multiple rows, which cause no data found or too many rows exceptions respectively. Suppose that particular select statement does not return any row. You understand? The SQL statement does not return any row, then it doesn't affect any result at all. At the same time, if it is actually returning more than the rows, more than one row, multiple rows, then also it's not too efficient. All right. So this is about implicit cursors. All right. Before getting into the explicit cursors, we'll do an example. We'll run an SQL statement for implicit cursors. Can you see this? This is the implicit cursors which I've already written. And what is this implicit cursor? What are we doing here? See this particular, I'll just zoom in a bit. Yeah. Now see, what is the DML statement we are performing here? The DML statements that are being performed is students details. We are actually updating the students details. Where the total fee, TF is nothing but total fee, we are increasing it by 1000. For whom? For those who are actually opting a course code, well, let's say 1. Whoever has opted a course code 1, for them, the total fee will be increased by $1000. In which table? In the students table. Fine. So what information we want to know from this particular query is particular operation is. Now suppose there's no students, actually we want to know how many students are affected by doing this particular operation. How many students are being affected is all that we want to know. All right, so that we are doing, we are using some attributes like not found, found, and row count. Before running this cursor, let's see the details in the students table so that we'll understand it better. So I'm running the students table, and let's see the students table here. Can you see that students table? So the students table, you can see here the course code. If you see the course code field, it doesn't have a course code with course code 1. Fine. That means when you run this implicit cursor, there will not be any rows affected by this operation. So the first if condition gets satisfied and no students with the course code name WD will be displayed. All right, we'll do that now. So that is our expected output. So this is what we are expecting, because there's no student who has opted course code 1. So we are saying that we are printing no students with course code WD. So you got some kind of information from the cursor. Now suppose if I change it to 2. So I want to see how many students total fee is getting increased by 1000 for the course code 2. So how many students have opted course code 2 is what I want to know. So there is only one student who has opted course code 2. So that means there's only one row that got affected. Suppose if it is 5, you can see here I'm running the students table once again. Let's see there are 2 records with course code 5. That means if I make this updation to 5 with course code 5 and run it again. So here the total number of affected rows is 2. All right, so like this, using this attributes of the cursors, we'll be able to get some kind of information from the result. So this is an implicit cursor. You can see here we don't have any kind of hold on the query at all, or on the cursor at all, because we are not opening the cursor, nor we have named the cursor. So nor we are fetching any kind of data from the cursor. So we don't have any hold on the cursor. It is automatically being generated by the Oracle engine, and we are able to extract some kind of information. Let's see explicit cursors now. Explicit cursors are what? They're the user-defined cursors. So an explicit cursor is a select statement declared explicitly in the declaration section of the current block or a package specification. Don't worry about those terms. We're going to see what exactly our explicit cursors do with an example. So for an explicit cursor, you have control over its execution cycle from open, fetch, and close. There are certain there's a certain way to declare a explicit cursor. So you have to follow the syntax of creating explicit cursor. Oracle defines an execution cycle that executes an SQL statement and associates a cursor with it. Now let's see the steps of how to use an explicit cursor. There are 4 steps in all. Now this is very important. Please focus. There are 4 steps involved for an explicit cursor. First is declare a cursor. No, as we have discussed earlier, remember, explicit cursor is a user-defined cursor. That means to that particular work area, we are going to give a suitable name to it. That means the user will have a hold. The user will have a hold on that particular area. Whereas an implicit cursor, it's just for the information's sake, but you don't have any kind of hold on that particular area. You don't have any kind of control over that area. So the first step is declare the cursor in the declaration section. Give a name to the cursor block. Next, open the cursor. Now you can see in the declare section, in the execution section, you know the the structure of the PLSQL block. You know what a declaration section means and what an execution section means. I need not get to those into those details, I guess. Fetch the data from the cursor into PLSQL variables or records in the execution section. So the next step is when you run a query, you get some result. That result may be not just one row all the time. It will be set of rows. All the set of rows will be stored in a temporary area, and we call it as a cursor. Now we fetch one row at a time and do whatever manipulation you want. And we do this kind of fetch until the whole active set is empty. Understood? So this goes into a loop. You fetch one, I'll just draw a figure of it. Now you can see here, there is a query here. The query, you run a query. This is a query. After running a query, you get a cursor. So you get multiple rows here. What we do is we take one row, fetch one row, do whatever manipulations you want. You move to the second row, you move to the third row and fourth row until your cursor is empty. So after doing the fetching, finally when your cursor is empty, we close the cursor. Alright, so there are 4 in all. What are they? Declare, where you give a name to the cursor, open the cursor in order to do manipulations. Next, fetch the data, fetch the row or record one by one, and you put it into a record variable or a set of variables. Then finally you do the fetch operation until all the records are accessed, and finally the cursor gets closed. Right? So you can see here, we declare, we open, we fetch, we do this until the cursor is empty. Finally, once a cursor is empty, all the rows are accessed, then the cursor is closed. Alright, so this is the syntax of writing the explicit cursor. Declare the variables, records, create a cursor, begin, open the cursor, fetch it row by row, and finally close it. Alright, so you know the attributes associated with cursors are the same as that of implicit cursor too, is, open, found, not found, and who count. So we'll do it by an example. We'll understand it better by an example. Now you can see an explicit cursor here. There's an explicit cursor here. It's very simple. You can understand it. So there is what exactly we are doing. There are too many statements, but not to worry. I'm going to show you how actually. Don't worry. It's very simple. Forget about all this part. Just concentrate on this. Yeah, on these 3 lines. This is a select statement. You can see it's a select statement. What are we selecting? We are selecting the student number, student name, and the fee paid from the students table, and we are putting it in the descending order of fee paid. Okay, we are ordering the rows selected based on the fee paid in the descending order. So when I run this query, I run only that query. So I get this kind of result. The fee paid is what? This is in the descending order of their result. Now what exactly I want to do is, I want to print only the first 3 rows. I want to print only the first 3 rows of this query. So this result, what I do is I hold it in a query. Sorry, I hold it in a cursor. I'll name that block, that cursor block. I give some name to it. After doing that, I'll fetch row by row, and then I'll print it on the screen. As simple as that. So because I have to do it multiple times, I'll use a loop here in order to do that. Okay, how many times I have to run? I have to run 3 times loop because I want the first 3 rows of that result to be printed. Right? So as we have discussed, the first thing is what? In the declare section, you have to declare a cursor. So the keyword is cursor, name the cursor, and how the cursor has to look. It means that the cursor will have the result of this query. Right? So high fee paid, that's what it means. High fee paid. Okay? High fee paid, high FP is the name of the cursor. What does it contain? It contains the result of the query. That's nothing but this. Fine. Rest of the things, you know, we are just taking them into this is declaration part of the variables. And the next step is, the second step of the cursor is we have to open the cursor. We've already discussed in the PowerPoint as what are the four different, the steps to use the cursor. First one is declare, next is opening, next is fetching, and finally closing. So we are in the second step of it, open high FP, and now here we are running a loop. I'm fetching, you can see here I'm fetching from the cursor IFP into the various variables. If it is not found, if that particular cursor is not found for some reason, maybe if you haven't opened it or if it doesn't contain any rows, then we just simply exit it, or else we are going to print the student name, the student ID, and the fee paid. So I want this to be printed like this. I'll run the cursor and finally we close the cursor. I'll run it and show how actually it gets displayed. I'm running this part. Now look here, what are we printing? Student number 104, the name of the student, and the fee paid. This is what actually we are intended to do. Fine. So it's a simple cursor where we are creating the cursor by providing some name, and we are writing a query. The result of the query will be stored in this cursor. We open the cursor. After opening, we start fetching it by running it multiple times. The number of times, how many times you want, that many times you want, you can run. You can run it to the end of the cursor also. But here I am doing it only for the first 3 rows. So my requirement is like that. So, and whenever I get a row, I am printing it in this fashion. Before I conclude, I am displaying the code for both the cursors, implicit as well as explicit. Pause the video and note down the code. Let's summarize the things what we have seen in cursors. So we have learned when and where to use a cursor. We have understood the differences between implicit cursor and explicit cursor. Learned the usage of attributes of a cursor. We have learned how to write a cursor following the steps. We have 4 different steps, you remember? Then we have seen some running examples. Alright, so if you want a detailed notes, please check this particular file plsql3.pdf, where you're going to get notes in detail. Alright, thank you. Let's learn more in the coming up videos.